Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the latest CCSE Talks. I'm Professor Gail McPherson, a Prof in Events and Cultural Policy and the Director of the Centre for Culture, Sport and Events. I'm delighted to have with us today Bernadette Quinn, who's a Senior Lecturer at the Technological University in Dublin, and Elias Simmons, who's a Senior Lecturer in Breda University. They're both going to talk today on the festivalisation of tourism and the power of the story. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bernadette, and she's going to present first, and then we'll have Ilya present, and we'll take questions at the end of the session rather than after one. So we'll hear both discussions, and it means that we can get a better question and answer and discussion. Please feel free to add to the chat as we go through, and then I can catch them for any questions that you may have at the end. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you colleagues at UWS for inviting me to speak. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon. I'm just going to share my screen now, and yeah, so are you able to see my screen there? Yeah.
Yep, if you could put it onto slide show. Yeah, that's
now it. Okay, good. All right, great. So Gail, I have 20 minutes, am I right?
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, yeah, okay, good. So thank you very much, everybody. And I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about regenerative tourism and festivals. What I want to do is to move my slide. Yes, I want to just critically reflect, I guess, on the relationship between arts festivals and tourism at this moment when we really know that we have to try to move tourism into a more just sort of set of structures and relationships. I'm going to focus today on rural places and festivals in rural places, and I'm going to argue that the current festival tourism connections are problematic, or at least could be improved. And I'm going to argue that, you know, if we begin to start to think about festivals beyond economics and beyond the moment of the spectacle, then I think that there could be a very synergistic relationship between festivals and regenerative tourism. So that's what I want to do. So, you know, we all know, I'm imagining that people in the room, and thank you so much for coming today, people in the room are interested and probably familiar with festivals. And I'm talking about arts festivals. And just to clarify, I'm not talking about commercial festivals here. I'm talking largely about festivals in the subsidised arts sector. And we know that the tourism sector thinks that, you know, there's a natural, in inverted commas, affinity between festivals and tourism. And of course, there is a huge amount of attractiveness for tourism in the festival sector. You know, they create this moment of spectacle, this time out of time, the extraordinary, they animate place, they entertain, they create colour and diversion and interest and opportunity to become immersed in a cultural encounter. And I'm imagining that we have a good idea about that, and there's lots and lots of literature on it. But I myself have long thought about this in a very critical kind of way, and I just checked up today. You know, I was writing about this in 2006, and I hadn't looked at that 2006 Journal of Tourism, Sustainable Tourism publication in absolute ages, and I suddenly looked at it the other day and I thought, gosh, I'm still saying the same thing, which doesn't seem very, very good, but I still seem to be saying the same thing. And, you know, recently I've noticed in Ireland, at any rate, an answer to the sustainability issues that seem to be arising seem to be, oh, let's have a festival. I seem to be seeing in Ireland, you know, festivals being turned to as a way of, for example, addressing regionality, as a way of addressing seasonality. But, you know, I was taken by Shaven's comment when she's writing about regenerative tourism. You know, she critiques this tendency for tourism to be seen as the answer to development, when really it may not actually be what the place actually needs at all. So that's just to give you sort of the critical perspective that I am coming from. And of course, we all know now, that tourism is highly problematic. I mean, I think everybody now has come to that acceptance, and I don't think the people in the room need persuading of that. And we have now, it is urgent that we try to develop a tourism that it does not harm, but it actually regenerates and restores and renews and all of those words. And it fosters not just economic values, but that it actually does all these broader holistic benefits as well. And there's a real urgency now, I think, around that. And of course, as somebody who's been long interested in festivals, I mean, we have to admit that festivals are absolutely implicated in this tourism problem. There's no question about it. Most of the work has been done in the urban context, and we see festivals implicated in the problem just in the general over-tourism sense, with all of that congestion and issues that causes. And there's an image there of, I know we're in Glasgow now, so there's the rival Edinburgh there. And also in terms of commodification, and I didn't have to look very far to find an image illustrating some of those cultural dilution, cultural distortion, cultural commodification issues that we associate with festivals and tourism. And then something that people in UWS and myself and others have written about, this idea of closing off, privatizing, limiting people's access to the city and to spaces in the city by the commercial festivals. So we know a great deal about that and continue to need to know more, especially about how festivals are implicated in the problem. But we know less about rural festivals, and that's where I'm focusing today. Now, we do know, like for a long time, literature coming out of Australia, for example, coming out of Denmark, coming out of the UK and elsewhere, has shown us that festivals are absolutely well-established components of tourism strategies at the regional level. So we know that for sure. But really, relative to urban context, we don't fully understand, I don't think, how festival tourism really plays out. Or at least I think we could do with understanding it further. So I am drawing on a study that was funded by the Irish Research Council. Thank you very much, Research Council of Ireland. We gathered data 21 to 23, and this study was not about tourism. I have to say that first of all. It was about the cultural sector, and we talked to arts festivals, and we talked to broader cultural stakeholders, like, for example, theatres and venues, arts officers and arts centres, to try to understand what was going on. A lot of our focus was on digitalization, but it gave us a broader insight into how festivals were doing in rural places. We stayed in towns and villages, so we kept out of the large cities, and we went to 4 counties to gather our data, and we found a lot of issues around underdeveloped infrastructure, for example, but we found a lot of well-established and very, very resourceful festivals. So as I say, it wasn't strictly at all on tourism, and there's just to give you an idea of the kinds of festivals. It was a wide diversity of festivals and the kinds of stakeholders that we looked at. But of course, they were located in tourism areas. So if you know anything about tourism in Ireland, you'll know that Dublin is a huge tourism point, but then we have this Wild Atlantic Way, which is the red line that runs all along the west coast. It's a huge marketing idea for Ireland in tourism, and it is a huge attractor of visitors to Ireland. And so 3 of our areas were along the Wild Atlantic Way. So it didn't take very long for tourism to start coming up in conversations. And it's that data that I want to talk to you about today. So just in terms of our findings then, just very simply, I'm not going to share a massive amount of findings, but just some key ideas. So we found that even the smallest of festivals attract tourists, and even tiny festivals can attract international tourists. And what that tells us, and what we found, was that tourists are really, really interested in small, intimate, immersive, participatory, and what they think as authentic. We found that festival audience capacities, as you might imagine, went from the tiny couple of hundred, to quite substantial, many thousand. But what we found was that the people we spoke to, they weren't bothered about the numbers. Numbers was never what preoccupied them in the cultural sector. They talked about numbers in relative terms. So they talked about the importance of attracting 500 people in November to the northern corner in Donegal, or they talked about the importance of gathering X type of people to celebrate X type of art form. So the numbers was never in and of themselves a useful metric, and we found astonishing levels of repeat visitation, just quite astonishing, something that I had come across several times in previous research. So we know from that there's built commitment, loyalty, interest in places and communities. And I suppose what I'm reading in here, at a time when tourism metrics need to be challenged, I'm seeing new possibilities for new metrics for measuring and evaluating and thinking about tourism, which I'll come back to in a minute. But we saw lots of disconnects, lots of ways in which arts festivals and the cultural sector more broadly in rural areas were not connecting with tourism efficiently. Now, it wasn't that the sector didn't want to engage with tourism, it absolutely did, and it saw the issues and it understood that rural towns and villages need footfall. It doesn't matter what that footfall is, they need bodies, they need people in commercial spaces. And we had festivals aspiring to attract audiences, but they were absolutely limited in their infrastructural capacities to do so. So, tourism infrastructure is a constraint on the expansion of festival audiences. We also found, though, limitations inside the festival organisations in terms of how they understood their audiences and how they marketed to their audiences. A huge amount of the people we talked to relied on volunteers. They simply didn't have the resources for that kind of professionalisation. And we also came across one interesting example where a festival had campaigned in their town for a regenerative project to be multifunctional and to include the cultural needs, but in fact it lost out, and tourism alone got the use of the new regenerated building. So we saw lots of points of disconnect. In addition, we found that tourism funders primarily value festivals in economic terms, and this was a misalignment of values in the strongest of terms. So we have all these quotes where you had these festival organisers pulling their hair out as they tried in their funding application forms to meet the criteria that were placed upon them by the funders. And they simply couldn't meet them, had no interest really in meeting them. It took up a great deal of time and admin to try to meet them. And it was frustrating for them, to say the least, to understand that they were viewed and measured in economic terms, largely. So that was quite difficult. So really, from where I come from and the findings from analysing the data from a cultural sector perspective and a festival perspective, is that the other data that I'm not reporting here, I've reported it, for example, I gave a paper in Atlas in June, and there's more work to be done on disseminating that. But, festivals foster cultural production, participation and engagement year round. So the data allowed me to see, that there is more than a festival moment. There's a festival year and there's a festival activities that are embedded in place all year round. So I argue that the data has allowed me to understand, that festivals are embedded in place. Culturally, they're working all the time, but also socially, they are operating all the time. And that's the point I stressed in the Atlas presentation in June. And festivals are embedded socially in terms of activism and empowerment and engagement and collaboration. And they're doing this all the time. So my conclusion here is that festivals are key to the social cultural vibrancy of a place, but tourism is not always helpful in that regard. And what I want to suggest is that tourism stakeholders in the current mode of operation in tourism, two things. They value the moment of spectacle exclusively, I think. That's what my data says to me. And they value it economically. So there's two issues that need addressing. I think regenerative tourism, we start to think more regeneratively around festivals, we can try to understand that, you know what, we can think of valuing festivals beyond the moment, and we can think about valuing them beyond the economic as well, by using different kinds of metrics. Now, already elsewhere in tourism, we are beginning to see how tourism is transitioning to thinking in the longer term around process. So, for example, they're trying to come up with immersive experiences that showcase and support practices embedded in rural systems. So I've got some images here. So the large image there, you know, that's a dairy farm that's now operating a cafe to sell the chocolate that's made using the milk that comes from the cows. So not only do they buy the chocolate, and they can go and visit the experience. You know, we have the salt in Gironde in Brittany, same idea. So you're bringing the tourist backwards through the production process of the end experience. And here we have the Kerry Craft Trail. Now, I'm suggesting that in festivals, we need to start thinking about festivals in that way, that regenerative approaches will find opportunities to connect into the cultural system beyond the moment and support places in an integrated way. So what I found was that organisations like the Inishowen Trad Singer Circle up in Donegal, for example, I mean, they work year round doing all kinds of things that have can operate as a resource for tourism. So they're all the time co-producing with theatres. You know, they're staging performances at other times of the year. They have educational materials on their websites that offer opportunities for tourism to link into. So I think there's lots of ways with innovative thinking that regenerative tourism can latch into this. Now, if we go back to the moment, and of course, people in the room are thinking, oh yes, but it's the spectacle that tourists want, and it absolutely is, and that will continue to be the case. But I think in that moment, I think we can think about what I am referring to as the relational values of arts festivals. So festivals are rooted in place, which was my previous point, in through this deep ecosystem, but they're also relational. You know, we've lots written on how, you know, festivals are connected, you know, they're created by interconnections with other places consistently. And, you know, Vicken has written about self-other relations as being not ethnocentric, but as being ethno-relative. And these are key ideas for regenerative tourism. Festivals are that opportunity for tourists to encounter, to understand, to respect, to share, to learn, to exchange, and to negotiate. They are places where we have these very, very blurred distinctions between who is who because of the high levels of repeat visitation. Now, I would really like to see tourism decision makers think about those kind of metrics when they think about festivals, rather than just saying, oh yes, December is looking like a dead month, let's start up a new festival. Why, you know, why not think about these attributes that are very, very regenerative with and full of possibilities for restoration, and they facilitate these immersive participatory co-creative experiences. And you know, I think in the environmental literature with tourism, relational ideas of place are very relevant. Because what happens when people start building relationships, attachment, they build commitment, they build a sense of belonging, and they lead then to caring behaviours. And that is what we need now in tourism. We need caring, considerate, respectful behaviours. I think these ideas have yet to be explored fully in the cultural heritage context, but I think there's real application to look further at ideas like that. That's a big long quote. I don't have time. I'm under pressure here now, but you know, a quote from one of our participants. How many minutes, Gail?
Just a minute or two.
Just a minute or two. So, you know, but there's the voice of a participant understanding what their festival means and the type of tourist who comes there. And it captures an awful lot of what we would like the regenerative tourist to be, I think. They're talking about behavior. They're talking about respect. They're talking about context and scale specific. Here's my last slide. So I think this is a love affair, arts festivals and regenerative tourism, as opposed to arts festivals and old-fashioned tourism as we know it. I think that if we start to understand arts festivals as embedded and as relational, we will begin to see new possibilities for making tourism more regenerative. I think if we start to think like that, we'll begin to see other kinds of metrics that privilege scale and context specificities, that privilege respectful human place encounters, that privilege human well-being, social, cultural inclusion, and that privilege the holistic integrated development that regenerative tourism approaches are calling for. But of course, and there's an enormous but, knowledge and values and decision-making processes that are prevalent at the minute need to transition, and the challenges there are enormous. Thank you very much for listening. That's me at a festival in my hometown, actually, and that's just a reference to a recent publication that where I write about this idea of thinking about festivals beyond the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. That was excellent. And I really like this idea of embedding the relationship and making it so that it's not just transactional. It's not just a tourist pound or economy coming in there, that it's actually embedded within the community throughout the year. It's a really great idea that we'll pick up in the questions, and probably takes us nicely onto Elia, who's going to talk about the power of the story within the festival and tourism regeneration. Thank you. You take away.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Go. Yes, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. It's actually really nice to listen to Bernadette and to think while I was listening how it ties in with my story, which is very different. But there's some, I think it's interesting to hear them both after each other. Okay, so the power of the story. So my name is Ilya Simmons. I'm located in Breda at the Breda University of Applied Sciences, and there I am coordinating a research line called Placemaking and Events. But I'm also a member of the storytelling research line. So I'm combining these two trying to combine these two perspectives. So this image that you see is about the first paper that I ever wrote. It's an event. It's called Draaksteken. It's a play about St. George and the Dragon, and it's been performed for 300 years in a village where my grandmother grew up. So as a child, we would go there, but it's performed only once every 7 years. And I wrote this paper about it because people told me never to write about your grandmother's village because it's too close. But I thought, no, this village is so special because they relate so much to this dragon and this dragon story. And it's a big identifier for this village. And it's really part of the cultural identity. So that triggered already my idea about how these stories are related to place and how they're related to events. So then I went on my own exploration about stories and how they're related. And I found it's not an easy job because stories are everywhere. So I encountered this multi-headed dragon, and I'm still trying to make sense out of it. But so at first, the difference between stories and narratives. Stories are intangible heritage. They're also used. We use them in the storytelling group at my university a lot for experience design, which is a very different approach. I'm very interested myself in the dominant stories that are told and the stories that are not told. So whose stories are we telling? I came across destination story worlds, trying to capture a whole destination into a story. And also I came across narrative identities. So this is a big, we can never do it. That's what we encounter. Also, when people say they are into storytelling, they mean a lot of different things. But overall, I adopted this. I like this quote a lot by Muriel Rukeyser, I hope I pronounced her name right, the universe is made of stories, not of atoms. And of course, we know the universe is made of atoms, but this also shows I have a background in sociology, and I really adopt a constructionist approach. I think this is why we make things continuously. We debate things, and our realities are made narratively. So I narrowed this down to two core concepts that I think are very useful in understanding our reality, understanding events, understanding destinations. And the first one is the concept of narrative sense making, which is a process through which we interpret and create meaning by constructing narratives. So this means that in order to make sense of something or a place where we are, we maximize certain events, we minimize other things, or we leave them out. We start telling a story at a certain point, and as soon as it's satisfying, and we think, yeah, this is satisfying from a certain perspective. And in this narrative construction, coherence and consistency are very important. So we have to maximize certain things and leave out other things. Otherwise, the story is not coherent. And then we also make sense of ourselves, of our identities narratively. So via those same narrative principles, we make sense of who we are. And Giddens also describes identity as the way we keep a particular narrative about ourselves going. But if we take this narrative perspective, we also come across the pitfalls of storytelling. Because as soon as we have this narrative crafted, it can become very seductive. It presents a single point of view, but a very believable point of view, because once the story is coherent, we have more, well, it becomes our reality and it becomes static. This is what it is. So this means also that these dominant stories can marginalize other narratives. Yeah. And then to see events as storytellers is very appealing to me. And we've seen this in literature, that place narratives are highlighted and performed during community events. And they're very suitable to telling a community story to both internal and external audiences. And at the same time, events being out of the ordinary, temporary, can also disrupt typical social groupings and temporarily rearrange status dynamics for people during the time of the event, which means that people can explore also different possible narratives during this event and can act out different plots, if you want, during this event. So to illustrate this, I would like to zoom in on a case study I love very much. We recently completed this study. I don't think I can tell you all the nuances about this, but I will give it a try. Luckily, we have it published very recently. Yeah, if you're curious, you can read more about it. So this is about Kaya Kaya Festival in Curaçao. And the story goes that this event has played a pivotal role in changing the dominant place narrative of the neighborhood of Outra Banda from a very negatively perceived, stigmatized area to a vibrant and artistic neighborhood. This is a story. It's a very. This was what was the reason for us also to go and talk to people involved in this event. It's a widely adopted story that this event changed this neighborhood. So we wanted to see, okay, how did this work? Yeah, I added. Sorry for the Shutterstock, but last minute I added an image of where this event is located. So Curaçao is a former Dutch colony, so we have quite strong ties with Curaçao, located just above Venezuela, so a Caribbean island. And Willemstad is the capital of Curaçao. So a bit of the context. Outra Banda means in local language the other side, referring to the location. It's one of the 4 neighborhoods of the capital, and the whole capital is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Most of the monuments are located in Otrowanda, and it's also the most populated area. And so, obviously, if you know this history, you know it has a very rich history and rich tradition, and it's quite beautiful. But mid 20th century, it got a very negative reputation as a troubled neighborhood because of all kinds of circumstances, people moving away, and this is what stuck. This is what people told us also in the interviews. This is the story that was told about the neighborhood. It's not a good neighborhood. It was also very much discouraged as a neighborhood for tourists. There's cruise tourism in Curacao, and tourists would go off the cruise ship, walk around Otrowanda, across the bridge, and then visit the city. So it was really discouraged. Okay, and then Kaya Kaya is an art festival. Kaya means street. It's been there since 2018. They have street parties, street art and murals created that are revealed during the event. It was organized from 3 friends. One of them lived in the street that they had the first festival, and it developed from there. Now they have the art festival in the area in different alternating streets. They have guided tours during the art week with art houses, local artists exhibiting. And in last year, they added Skol Urbano, which is was in an abandoned or empty school building where they also did workshops. Okay, this is what we wanted to know. How did the dominant narratives of the neighborhood evolve over time? How did the event practices influence the perceptions of the neighborhood? How did it enable personal and collective expressions of identities, or these narrative identities? And also, what are the consequences of this new or changed narrative? We did 3 workshops during Skol Urbano. Very creative methods. I will not go into them right now, but we had a lot of conversations. We also did 18 interviews with a wide variety, all people. I collaborated, maybe I should say that, with 2 scholars who are from Curacao. And we interviewed stakeholders, and we did participant observation. So let me go to the findings. We immediately found that the former narrative of Otrowanda was negative. Nobody wanted to go there. Everyone's scared. This is a person saying this from Curacao. She said also, we saw it as the ghetto. We didn't put it in our paper because it triggered quite some emotional responses, the word, but nobody would go there. People had no reason to go there. And also many houses and public spaces were in poor condition. Also, we immediately found that someone from Curacao working for a tour operator, the tour guide would always tell people not to go there. But we also immediately found that there was a counter narrative, because people who used to live or lived in the area said, well, we always felt safe. We never felt unsafe, and we loved living there. It was a very mixed neighborhood. Poor people, rich people, many people out on the streets because it's warm. So it's warm. There's a lot of street life and people taking care of each other's children. So that narrative was also there, but silent. People were more eager to tell us, no, it was bad. It was not good. So you also saw that people from Curacao, the people from the neighborhood, told a different story than the people who had no reason to go there. Then zooming in on the event, what we found was that it actually ties in very well with what Bernadette was saying, that there's a moment that the event takes place, but all year round there are things happening. One of the organizers called it positive peer pressure. It ties in with the local within the local culture that when you host a party, you first clean up your space, you give it a fresh paint, they said, you arrange food and drinks, and then you have your party. So residents were given paint, it was sponsored, to paint their houses, and also scaffolding, which is expensive. People wouldn't do that. So everyone in the streets where the party was held improved the looks of the houses. They painted it together, and it was cleaned up together. Yeah, so a lot of people told us they cleaned up, there was garbage, it was all cleaned up, it looked really nice before the event took place. This was a specific mentioning of a Kura edition. The Kuras are the spaces between the houses that were really used as garbage dumps. And by cleaning them up, there was a lot of space to have the art event. And also they stayed clean because people loved sitting there, being there, and it's opened up connections in the neighborhood. Here are some pictures. Yes, murals. The murals and street art were very central, and they're all created for the event, but they're lasting, obviously. So there's physical changes. Also here, some of the changes, the stairs are very, people love these stairs because they create connections. They're called the colorful stairs. One of the earlier editions, they're in all the pictures now that are taken of the neighborhood. And this is an amphitheater also created in a kind of a smelly corner, smelly or dark corner. Yeah, it's lasting changes because of the event. And then during the event, we called it collective enjoyment. What they did was in these areas that were considered unsafe, they would, for example, under the viaduct, it was dark, they created food stalls. It's lasting also. People wanted to keep going there. They created events, and people were really impressed that people were dancing in these corners. One of the residents says the street belongs to everyone. And we had a lot of different people coming into these streets. And there was a reason to go to this neighborhood. Normally, people who would never avoid going to this neighborhood, if there's a lot of people on the street, it gives you a reason to go there. Also, the art houses. So one of the residents says, well, everyone went there to see how people live, to enter these houses because you can have a peek and it's curiosity. What is going on there? So it was immediately quite successful. Obviously, after the event, the murals and the street art stay. And what you see is that it draws in visitors, also tourists, more and more, but also local visitors. And people said walking in Outrobanda has become some kind of tourist attraction. Now, people don't necessarily walk a lot in Curaçao. It's not an activity as it would be here in the Netherlands. But walking in Outrobanda, there's a reason to walk because you walk to see the murals. So it's something that people do when they have visitors over. And also one of our respondents said, well, I think it's not threatening anymore because you went to walk there. It's just a neighborhood. They're a little bit less off than you, but that's all. Okay. We also saw some evidence of this performance of identities, a change in narrative identities. At first, I was hesitant. I think, do we really see it? But then my co-author, who is from Corina, who's from Curaçao, said, no, it's very important because people tell me, I hear it now also. We have these expressions translating to child of Outrobanda that you hear again. They were there, but there was no room to express it. People felt proud of their neighborhood, because of this overarching narrative that it was not a good neighborhood, there was no room of expressing this, and now you can again. Also, some more stories about one of the young people who helped clean up this neighborhood turned it into a job. He now owns a pickup truck. Very important to mention, but he made a job out of this. You can also see the context very well. It's very specific context, this Caribbean island, where you could probably do more things. There's more room for initiative like this, informal initiative that you can actually turn this into a job. And people described the drug addicts because this was one of the issues in the neighborhood. And drug addicts haven't completely disappeared. But of course, if there's a lot of old buildings, empty buildings, it's a place for these activities. Drug addicts are still there, but people give them jobs, she says. You can even see it. They can wash a car or cut a tree to be something else than just a drug addict that has to be avoided. This is a very positive story, and there's positive, but we also encountered new challenges, obviously. There's a fear of over-tourism, not so much with the crowding, but more with Airbnb coming into the neighborhood and people buying, especially Dutch investors, buying properties to short-term visitors that do not add so much to the neighborhood. So you see that happening, and it's a real threat. Gentrification, definitely also mixed feelings about it. Many of the investors are local people, so they know the neighborhoods, but still prices increase, and everyone wants to live in Otrowanda now, where first nobody wanted to live in Otrowanda. You see this challenge. Also still ongoing social issues, but there's no room for these issues anymore in the new dominant narrative of this hip and artistic neighborhood. But there's still poverty, there's still some crime, there's some streets that do not want to participate with Gaya Gaya, but this is now becoming silence. So we still have a lot of work to do, this person says. Conclusions? I don't know how I am with time. Probably.
You're fine. Just
yeah. Okay. Well, we could draw a lot of conclusions also about the event and the incremental change and the physical changes and how this changed the neighborhood. But here I chose to draw the conclusions about narrative construction. It's very interesting that you see that both the old and the new dominant narratives are incomplete. So the previous narrative as an unsafe area, while inhabitants also describe it as of having a very warm community and being very inclusive. And also the current narrative, where we want it to be a very hip and artistic neighborhood, while some people emphasize that the neighborhood also still faces challenges. But we noticed also when talking to people about it that it's good they see it as good for the neighborhood that there's more people coming in and tourists coming in. So now it's not always a good idea to emphasize these challenges. And also we found evidence that this overarching narrative influences individual narrative identities. So the possibilities of people to express who they are is really constrained, but also sometimes enabled by these overarching place narratives. So this paper we published, I'm very happy about it, but of course this is an ongoing thought process, and what it has led me to is this idea of narrative plurality, where you always have multiple stories, and there's layers of stories, and they're sometimes conflicting. But in this narrative construction, in order for a narrative to be good, and especially in a place like Willemstad, where actually nothing happens with everything includes tourism. Everything includes tourism. It's so because it's such an important sector that these narratives are created for an audience. But anyway, this idea of narrative plurality, that we have layers of multiple stories, I would like to dive into more, where place. We have, together with a colleague from Leiden University, been working on this related to heritage, which is constantly also performed, evolving and negotiated, and includes multiple stories, layers of stories. I'm also very interested in the role of events in highlighting these stories. I think on this slide I put a lot of concepts that I'm thinking of that I still need to tie together. I think the concept of story
just maybe
world,
a minute now, Elia.
Yeah. Concept of story world is very useful in this context, especially with the idea that many stakeholders should be invited to co-create and negotiate these narratives. And this was it. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. That's great. Bernadette comes back. On her screen, we can start to take questions. I think that was excellent from both of you, and there's some really nice connections that I got a sense around the sense of place. And in Bernadette's presentation, the place was becoming so important to ensure that it went beyond the economics to identities and social aspects of the place. And Elia, in yours as well, I was getting the sense that when you were saying the stories on one hand allow the sense making, but also, I'm just looking at my notes, constructing identity again around that sense of place. And I wonder if maybe you could just elaborate just slightly, or from both your perspectives, on that sense of place when we're faced with things like over-tourism and the drive from economics, and we're trying to use place as a regenerative approach to identity and tourism. Ilya, you talked about place narratives enabling the collective and individual sense of identity. And that seems to me that that may also be the case for Bernadette's study, that the sense of place was acting as an enabler. But what's the drawback of that? What is stopping that taking place?
Is this directed to me?
I'll go for Ilya first, and then Bernadette can maybe jump in.
Well, what I can say about this is that we saw in this study that the overarching narrative being negative before really stops people from it limits people in their possibilities. So people acting out what they want to be, what they and expressing who they want to be, and that they're tied to this place and that they're proud of this place. It really, if the place is stigmatized like this, people will not feel the room to express this, even though they feel it's part of their identity. And especially when it is related to tourism, we have really this this urge to create this story world that's coherent. So it's either so we limit the narrative. We limit the narrative of what we want to say. And now you see it when the narrative is it's a very artistic and hip and creative neighborhood. It enables people to tell, to identify with it again, residents, and it can enable a lot of things, but it's also, again, limited for telling the full story. Maybe that's, Bernadette, you want to add to this?
Yeah, so, I mean, who is making the decisions? Who's making the decisions? I mean, what I think I'm arguing for is that we need those decisions to take on board context specific, the specificities of place. One size does not fit all, but the decisions are being driven by, large corporations, national at least funders or international funders. So and of course then standardizing, homogenizing, and bringing, as Ilya is saying, limiting. It is much more efficient. And that's one of the huge challenges that I think as we move forward is to try to hear the voices from individual places, which I think are so important.
Thank you. We've got quite a few questions in the chat. I don't know if you'll be able to see them yourself as well, but I'll start with one from Medea, who says, excellent presentation. Thank you for sharing the cases. Is there a long-term plan to keep this even sustainable and consistent, tackling the challenges, i.e. mass tourism, high inflation, Airbnb, and also to keep the stories of the district authentic?
Yes, I'm very happy with this question. Thank you, because I know that the organizers from Kaya Kaya Festival would want me to emphasize that they have this long-term vision. It's complex. It's a complex story, but they don't call themselves event organizers anymore, but they call themselves placemakers and a movement.
That's interesting.
So they are, they're very busy with this, creating a long-term vision, and trying to navigate this, which is not easy, but they're on top of it. It's, as Bernadette also mentioned, it's a year-round. Activity. It's activities year round. So it's not just the moment. It's interesting because they need this event because all eyes are then on the neighborhood and on them, and it draws a lot of attention and it enables a lot. Also, it's a pressure. It's a means of pressure.
It seemed to me as well that event allowed the authenticity of what you talked about earlier, of the intangible cultural heritage, through the storytelling, and for actually maybe people within residence to revisit their own cultural heritage in that.
Yes, but also, I mean, as much as the event grows, there's also criticism now. You see that, who benefits from the event and who is, but there is definitely a long-term vision. So, but yeah, we can also all see that the gentrification is a real issue. It's a real, you see it in other neighborhoods happening. So, I hope they are, yeah.
I'm going to move on to some other questions. I'm going to put a couple of them together because just some of them are there. One from Graham Condy was, how do each of you think the narrative of storytelling can inform sustainable management and economic justification for tourism? And then one from Amina for Bernadette that says, can you expand on the temporal potential of regenerative concepts in embedding co-creation or production aspects across time? Is there another misalignment that the big day of an event is the destination, but the journey to get there across the weeks and months leading to the event has so much potential for engaging processes which are aligned to place across time? I think, Amina, you may also be answering Graham's question above of moving that beyond economic justification. But Bernadette, if I go to you on that one, thanks.
I was afraid you were going to do that. I mean, I think in Graham's question, I mean, storytelling is now huge. I mean, tourism marketeers have really cottoned on to the idea of storytelling. So I would be really concerned, if you like, with my critical hat on, that is the case, and that what's going to happen is some of those problems that Ilya has sort of pointed to about the standardization and the limitation of the storytelling narratives that are told. So I think we have to be really, really careful about that. I mean, I think there's huge potential there, but I think we have to be really, really, really careful. And again, back to asking those questions about whose voices and who is allowed speak and who isn't allowed speak, and for what interests and for what return. So I think storytelling is very of the moment at the moment, but we really have to be very careful about that one. And just on Amina's question, I can't answer that question, which is, to expand on the temporal potential, other than as I'm reading the regenerative tourism literature, I don't think that temporality idea has received much attention. And I think it's very important. And I think that it's something that really, really needs theorizing and thinking about. And I'm only just starting to think about it.
If this will add to it as well. Ilya, do you want to come in on that? And then I have another question come through from Martin.
Well, regarding the storytelling question, I think it's important. It's with many of these concepts, we can take a critical perspective. We should take a critical perspective on this. And if we don't, we can use it for the benefit of a few. And I think we can also use it if we're aware of the power and what you're constructing with these stories. Yeah, you can hopefully also create a more sustainable way of storytelling. And there's lots of research also being done on this now. But it's I think that's what I want to add. Yeah.
Martin Robertson has asked to both presenters, and he says, thank you, it was fabulous. Is there real value in co-producing a better place and purpose of festivals through co-writing of a best story end, say 15 to 20 years ahead, agreed by communities, residents from all corners of life, inclusive of drug addicts, etc., and SMEs, story narratives towards an agreed future and a set of hoped outcomes? I think that might be a bit of a futuristic question there from Martin. If I've got that wrong, Martin, feel free to come in and ask it.
I love it, Martin. I'm there. I love it. That's a great idea.
Yeah,
and a brilliant idea for a project. Yeah, count me in.
That's a new paper, maybe.
Yeah, let's do it. No, but I think that is sounds really good. Yeah.
He's put up virtual book writing. Well, maybe these talks could lead to a book series or something. Yeah, we'll maybe get out of that. Does anyone else have any other questions? I think have I got them all? I don't want to, in case I've missed anything, but I think And Graham's just put back, interesting, it sounds like one size doesn't fit all. And I think that's probably a really important maybe point to end on, is that we need to be careful that we don't just mirror what happens in other festivals in other cities because we think it works, or as a response to poverty, or again, in the way that sometimes sports mega events are used as a vehicle to solve a city's problems. Festivals can't do that either. And I think what you're stressing is it really does need to be embedded, and it needs to be authentic. And actually, if you work together in that placemaking and through regeneration, then it can add to the sense of place and identity. One last